Hello and welcome to Teenagers Untangled, the audio hug for parents going through the teenage years. I'm Rachel Richards, journalist, parenting coach, mother of 2 teenagers and 2 bonus daughters. Now with that background, you can imagine I've seen my fair share of girl friendship turmoil. It's not easy as a parent, so I'm drawn to anyone who has really good insights that can help us support our tween and teen girls. Now, recently, I met another Rachel at a working morning, and she told me about Andrew Hampton, the former head teacher who founded Girls on Board. Now, this organisation trains teachers to help girls solve friendship issues, but his role is more than that. He's a thinker and trainer on school-based relational cultures of both boys and girls. So obviously, I knew we would all want to hear what he has to say. Welcome, Andrew. It's been a long time since I read the book Queen Bees and Wannabes and created an episode, which is, I think, episode 10, talking about the dynamic inside girl friendships. Yeah. And I continue to draw on that to this day. But your book, When Girls Fall Out, which is a guide for parents and daughters, told from the girls' point of view, is brilliant. And I've got to say, it's a much broader look in on the way that girls relate to each other. And I found it very, very helpful. What I'd like to start with is, you're a guy and you wrote this book about girl friendships, but you did it with your daughters, which I thought was perfect. Yes. What prompted you to actually start to write something like that?
Yeah, thank you. And I think I want to start by saying, Rosalind Wiseman is the guru on this. And when I was a head teacher, so I was a head teacher for 18 years, and I was finding that definitely the hardest thing I could do as a head teacher was to try to help girls when they fell out. And girls were leaving my school at an alarming rate, to put it that way. Something like 12 girls left us what was a very small school. So it was very, very, every time it happened, it was a big, big, big thing. And her book was the book that I found when I was just sitting on the sofa in despair going, what are we going to do about this? Because whatever we're doing isn't working and there has to be a different way. And her book was what I kind of came across when I was searching the internet. So I created this thing called Girls on Board, which is all about using empathy and empowering the girls to sort it out for themselves. And after I'd been doing Girls on Board 2 or 3 years, I decided to write the parent guide because clearly it's equally hard for parents when their daughters are falling out. And when I say I wrote it with my 2 daughters, that's not just a sort of tokenistic thing. Let's put them on the cover. Holly in particular really did co-write this. So I did kind of most of the donkey work, but then she came along and restructured the whole thing for me. And in the end, we kind of went back to sentence level and we kind of argued about every single sentence. So it took 3 years to get it through. And then my oldest daughter, Naomi, who is a consultant psychiatrist, she came in late on with some really excellent stuff about validation and empathy. And so, yeah, it really is a team effort. But as you say, I have kind of no right to write a book about that as a man. And I kind of always acknowledge that. But literally everything that I've kind of got in that book and in the whole Girls on Board approach is given to me by the girls. So I'm working with the girls on a regular basis. I was working with a year 9 group just yesterday, and I learn something every single time I'm in front of a class of girls, and they kind of give me a new perspective on what it's like to be them. And I absorb that, and then I feed that back into my work.
Yes. And I want to just pause a second there so that parents who are listening to this podcast, it's called an audio hug for a reason. You're an incredibly experienced person who's still learning, who's still going, oh, I see, it's like that. And it's for all of us. It's not that you're broken or you're not a good parent. It's that it's just very difficult. So one thing just to start off with, a really kind of encapsulating idea is you talk about an existential imperative. What are you talking about when you're talking about what it is that girls are struggling with?
And I think that's kind of where I started when I was really trying to unpick what can I do as a head teacher and therefore informing my staff and informing parents. What can I do to understand why this keeps going wrong for girls, why it gets so incredibly painful for them and everyone around them. And I think, again, inspired by the Rosalind Wiseman book, I kind of thought, well, if we were to see friendship as the most important thing and not just kind of play around with that idea, but actually stamp that idea. And that's why I kind of use that, as you say, slightly highfalutin language of calling it an existential imperative. Then that kind of, hopefully gets the point through. So when I'm training people and when I'm talking to parents, I'm going, friendship is not a nice to have. It's not an
Yes.
add-on. It is the core of what it's like to be that age. And if we ignore that, then we will never make progress in terms of really helping them through a very difficult time of their lives. And of course, it's difficult for boys as well. Adolescence is a tough, tough time for nearly everybody. And once we've really acknowledged that it's about friendship, not for every girl, obviously, nothing about this is kind of true for everyone. There are always going to be exceptions. But for the vast majority, it's about friendship. And when we get that into our thinking and start from that point, then things start to change.
Yes, and we will come on to boys in a while, because you wrote another very interesting book called Working with Boys, and it is texturally different. The way that relationships work is very different, and understanding that can make such a difference for us as parents. And I love it because you said, girls can fall out over things which seem to adults to be low level, trivial, and even childish. And it's about understanding why this is so important to girls. So one of the things that I thought kind of really struck me as something I hadn't thought much about before was you were talking about the difference between boys and girls and where the explicit rules are and the implicit rules, and how girls tend to operate below that explicit rules line. And there's a lot of stuff going on that you can't put your finger on.
Yeah.
Can you talk a bit more about how that plays out?
Yeah, and I think that's a really important aspect of understanding how you can start to unpick what's happened in the story that you're being told. So what I mean by the explicit rules is what the school regards as good behavior and the value systems that they have. Now, pretty much every school in the world will regard kindness as an incredibly important part of the way that we interact as a community. And indeed, kindness is the rock, the bedstone of everything, isn't it? As civilization. If human beings cannot be kind to each other, then it all falls apart. And indeed, as we see across the world, lots of wars are happening. And if we were all kinder to each other, then those things wouldn't be happening. So kindness is incredibly important. Girls really get that. They hate really breaking the rules. And I know that sounds a little bit sexist, but I think it's true in my experience that girls on the whole try to avoid specifically breaking a rule within the school, most of them. And I think the reason for that is that if they do break a rule, particularly around a kind of relationship rule, if they are seen to be mean and unkind and bullish and physical with somebody else, they get into trouble. And that kind of licenses the other girls to say, well, you're not a very nice person. Therefore, we don't need to be your friend. And it reduces their status as a friend right to the very, very bottom. Which, if we were to compare that with boys, it just doesn't really work like that with boys. And sadly, sometimes boys will break the rules and they will gain kudos.
Yes.
For being the rebel.
Yes.
Now, of course, that can happen with girls, but it's much more common that it's the other way round. So as girls are, perhaps jostling around certain friendship turbulence, the idea of actually kind of being seen to be mean by the adults in the world is a bad strategy. So they don't do that. So they're very good. And this, again, sounds a little bit sexist, a little bit sort of, mean of me to say this, but they're very good at kind of manipulating their behavior in such a way that it might appear that they've broken the rules, but actually, when you look at it very closely, they haven't. And they're very good at defending what they've done and how they've done it. What's going on, therefore, is kind of below that line. And the implicit rules that I'm talking about are how friendships play out. So one of the kind of the classic ones is, you're not allowed to talk to a boy who you went out with 3 weeks ago.
Yes, all the time.
That sort of thing, It's not written in stone. It's certainly not the law of the land, but, it's girl code. And, and I think that's there are lots like that, actually. There are lots and lots of, and I think those kind of implicit rules around friendship come and go. And as, social media becomes obviously the massive platform for their friendships, there are often little rules about, the use of emojis and the use of images, and you're not allowed to do this, not allowed to do that. And I came across one the other day where someone said, if you're kind of exchanging Snapchat photographs of yourselves because, they like to do that, this is me in the evening, this is me with makeup on or whatever. If you do it full face, then we're fine. If you do it like half face, so literally the photograph is half of your face, that means there is a sense of uncertainty about the reliability of our friendship right now. I'm a little bit cross with you. If, on the other hand, the picture is, pointing down, maybe at your arm or something like that, we've got beef.
Oh,
Yeah, there you go.
It's,
You didn't
and
know
it's
that.
exhausting. It's exhausting. And my daughter the other day said to me, Mummy, you can't put a full stop after okay. And I said, really? Because I thought that was just grammar. And she went,
Yeah,
no, that's really aggressive. You can't do okay, whatever.
yeah,
But that's the thing. This is the subtleties are so
yeah.
so extreme, and they all know it. They know the code.
Yes, my daughter's 28. Holly is 28, and she keeps saying, "Can you stop putting full stops after okay?" Because it really annoys me. And I'm going, I have no
Right.
idea what you're
It's
talking
all of us. So one of the other things you do in the book, which I really loved, because I found that the Queen Bees and Wannabes book gave me some brilliant terms for different roles within groups.
Yeah.
One of the things I loved about your book was you talk about the sizes of groups, because again, this is different from boys, and that you can have groups that tend to be between, 2 to 6.
Yeah.
And there are dynamic differences between each of those types of groups, which will play out in difficult ways. I mean, why do these group sizes even matter?
And again, everything I'm saying here is entirely taught to me by girls. And the group sizes thing is something that I revisit every single time I talk to girls. And they really enjoy talking about it, and they have a huge amount to say. And I think, to be honest, I would revise the 2 to 6. I would say it's 2 to 4 now. So
interesting.
If you're in a duo, and they tend to call them duos, not pairs. If you're in a duo, the advantages are that you're closer, that you have to get on. There's a kind of, sort of beneficial codependency there. The disadvantage is if your friend is not in that day, etc. 3s are very popular, but there is always that sense that one person is being left out. But I often think that each person within that 3 looks at the other 2 and thinks that they're closer and finds a reason for themselves to say, well, they're both in the choir and they're always talking about that. But the other girls are saying, but you both play netball and you're always talking about that. So that's quite a revelation, actually, when they kind of realize that everyone can feel like they're the third wheel when actually they're not, But you have to look after each other when you're in a 3. And I think that's the great strength of being in a 3. Parents often kind of say, I really wish my daughter wasn't in the 3, because they were always talking about the dynamics of that. But if you're getting on a minibus and there's 2 seats at the front, 1 at the back, you can't just ignore that. You've got to talk about it. We can't just, somebody's going to have to be left out. And that on the return journey, therefore, we need to distribute that differently so that that person has their fair share with the other person, And I think
just to interrupt, as a parent, what we can do is we can have those conversations with our kids about how do you manage that group dynamic to just help them.
Yes, but I think also I think it's a great topic to introduce to your daughter, with your daughter, and just listen to what she has to say about it, because I think you'll find half an hour later you're still talking about it. And it's not an area where I would think as a parent I would necessarily want to offer advice or guidance.
No.
I think it's an area where you would gain huge kudos and huge breaking down of the generational disconnect by just saying, wow, this is really interesting. Tell me more about what it's like to be in a 4.
Totally agree.
Tell me more about what and your experience. I can remember when you were in primary school, you used to be in a 3 then. So tell me about that. And she will just talk and talk and talk. And at the end, she'll turn to you as a parent and kind of go, that was the best conversation I've had with you for years. And you, as a parent, probably said very, very little indeed. You just listened, but it gave you an enormous insight into the moment by moment kind of granular experience of your daughter, and how she's in a 3 now, but maybe she's in a 4, and there's a huge debate going on. Should we ask this other girl to join us? But she kind of has already, and so on and so forth, and just listen to that. But I would say about 5s and 6s, I mean, on the whole, girls agree that 5s exist, but they're not very stable. And I think a 6 falls into the bracket of bigger group for me. And you definitely get bigger groups. I had a lovely interaction with a girl a few years ago where she said, we're a group of 17. And I said, that's a big number, and that's
unusual.
Amazing. How does that work? And she said, it works very badly. And I said, oh dear. And she said, well, it's okay, but we do fall out a lot. And I said, oh, that's a shame. And she said, so what we've decided to do is we've decided to have no beef Thursdays.
Oh, that's amazing. I love it.
Just absolutely adored that. But I think that the advantage of being in a bigger group, and quite often the girls will say, yes, we are a group of 10 or 11, and then somebody will say, but, are we including Ella in that? Because I'm not sure, So yes, it's still fluid. But if you're in a looser, bigger group, and you are a little bit at sea with your smaller subgroup, then you have permission, because you're in the bigger group, to go across to one of the other groups within the big group. So, maybe you're in a pair and your friend isn't, but you're within the bigger groups. You can go and join a 4 for the day, and be a temporary member. So I
Yes.
think that's where the bigger group sort of, that's how it plays into the dynamic. But really, in essence, the vast majority of girls are in a pair, a 3 or a 4.
Yes. And it's interesting because I've seen the 6
Yeah.
with one of my daughters.
Yeah.
And when I was sitting down chatting with them and I explained the queen bee wannabe kind of concept and the roles, there was a lot of recognition there.
Yeah.
Both of mine have ended up in 4s.
Yeah.
And it's really, really empowering. It's a really positive experience for them. So it's a very interesting thing because, of course, you can have 2 and 2.
Yeah.
When you're on the bus, you're 2 and 2. But it it's very fluid and that's and so one of the things you actually highlight is this issue of blending, and that when girls, you see, I think you mentioned it in the book that when there was a question asked on Twitter, what would you say to your 13-year-old self? All these parents are saying, "Oh, be yourself. Just get, just be who you want to be." And we all sort of fantasize about how, because we become capable of doing that as adults. Most of us, some of us never do. Yep. But actually, you try and say that to a teenager, and you're totally missing the point.
Absolutely.
Because blending is critical.
Yeah, it really, really is, and it's a shame that that's the case. Because so often you look at your daughter and you see, fabulous qualities in the way that she treats her siblings, in the way that she talks to her grandparent. And, she is noble and she's bold and she's self-confident. But if those qualities and her particular interests don't align with the interests of the groups at school, they are sadly something that she's going to have to keep mostly for her home life, because it's all very well, you're really into horses or whatever, but if nobody at school is into horses, then, you can't talk about horses. Or indeed, actually, if nobody is particularly interested in talking about their relationship with their grandparents, then again, all that work that you do as a young person to support your grandparent and the kudos you get from your parents for doing so is not really a topic of conversation or something that you can rely on as a kind of as a personal strength.
Yes, and it's social suicide to try and force it into the conversations. And you've kind of sliced and diced the types of experiences of girls slightly differently. So you have mentioned the queen bee.
Yeah.
And that, interestingly, you said, is kind of attempts to both control and disrupt social interactions to manage their own anxieties.
Yeah.
You do talk about girls in the water. And this is something we actually, I remember us talking about really early on in the podcast, and how it's like you feel like you're in shark-infested water if you don't have a friend. If you're a girl, you go up to senior school, it's terrifying, and you feel like you'd get into any lifeboat just to be out of the water because it's so terrifying. And I have witnessed this time and again. But that, we've got these various different roles. How can we parents support? So, for example, if you've got a child that's actually more of a leader who, some girls would say is bossy, we're sitting back, we're saying, okay, we can label these roles that these girls have, but how can we support them to understand how better they can manage themselves at school without telling them? Because the whole thing is we need to listen, don't we? We need to listen as parents and empathize, but how can we do anything to support our kids becoming more of a hopper, like for somebody who will just move to different groups and not feel she's got to be attached to something?
Yeah. And it's a very, very kind of dangerous area in the sense that, that people reading Queen Bees and people reading my book sort of say, oh, but you're stereotyping the girls. And that's very frustrating as an author and as the leader of Girls on Board, because I'm not, I'm absolutely not. But it's hard to imagine putting together an entire kind of way of supporting girls that doesn't mention some of those kinds of behaviours, because they can be very, very problematic. But back to your sort of question of how we can do that, I think, as you say, there is no telling of the girl, is there? You can't tell her, because that, even if what you have said is A, massively true, and B, actually completely puts your finger on the spot, she wants to reject that because you've said it. So, and that's her biology talking, it's not her just being difficult and perverse. It's her biology saying, no, I'm a separate human being from you. I am emerging through adolescence into adulthood. And part of that is to reject everything that you say.
Yes.
Unfortunately, and when she's 25, she'll turn around and say, that thing you said when I was 15, that was spot on. And although I shouted at you at the time, I did go away and I did take on board your advice. So that's another aspect of this. So what I have always done with my own daughters is to try very much to use, as it were, guided reflection. So I would just kind of hold up a mirror to that behavior and just kind of leave it there. So sort of say, so what you're saying is then when this happens and you'll respond, excuse me, when this happened and you respond like that, is that accurate? Is that how it is that what you're saying? And then we'll leave it at that.
Yes.
So just to kind of reword it for them and then feed that back. And then when she hears those words coming at her, she's going, yeah, I know exactly what you're saying. That sounds completely nuts. But the parent hasn't said, well, clearly that's a bit odd, isn't it? I don't think you should react like that. You leave it. You go, so the ... aspect of parenting, I think, is vital. And I think, you can learn to zip it at the right moment. Then the power is there. And sometimes even that means like, so I'm just reflecting. It's like just getting this clear. This is that, and that's how you write. Good. Okay. Oh, by the way, shall we have a drink now? And move on, so that she is left with that moment of being forced to reflect on something, but you're not actually asking her to say anything at that moment because you've actually changed the conversation at that point.
Yes, and her brain will continue working on the. And I think in my episode talking about how to talk to kids, I think I called that active listening. It's kind of feeding back to them so that they can. You're saying, "Oh, do you mean this?" And I love what you're talking about in the book about how to talk to teen girls. So when a girl comes home and tells her story about a friendship problem, we as parents often hear this conflict. We focus in on the conflict and we think, oh, we need to rescue or adjudicate, like fix something. No. And so you say focus on the emotion. So can you just expand on that before we move on to boys? Let's just expand on that. Best way, best practice.
I think the sort of the one sentence takeaway from this part of it is my niece said to me, I wish I'd known when I was growing up that when I came home to tell my mother the story of my day, I'm not telling her because she needs to know, but because I need to tell her. It's such a simple sentence, isn't it? But that's it. You're not there to hear the story or interpret the story, unless, of course, it's genuinely hideous and bullying is going on, in which case, obviously, it's a completely different situation. But most of the time, it's this. She said this, and then I said that, and blah, blah, blah. So your job is to just listen and understand that beneath that story, much of which won't be true, to be frank, is the emotion of I am seeking trusting and reliable friendships, and that is, I'm not feeling good about that right at the moment. And I kind of digested more recently my kind of advice to parents in that moment into 3 strands. One, as you say, active listening, not easy to achieve, but lots of kind of remarks about, oh yeah, that sounds really tough, and tell me more, and all those kind of things. Do not fix it. And secondly, then when you feel that section of that part of the day is beginning to come to an end, and this is a natural cadence in her ranting, that's when you affirm. So that's when you say, do you know what? I just want to say how much I love you. I just think you're the most incredible girl, and she might kind of go, Mum, Dad, what are you saying that for? Because I mean it, because I want to, because you are, So quite often the teenagers, both boys and girls, will kind of ostensibly reject that affirmation, but actually, of course, they don't mean it.
Landed.
They absolutely love it. And a big hug at that point, and then distract. So listen, affirm, and then distract. So the distraction thing is really important. And it comes very much from my understanding of my son who has suffered from OCD through his life. And how, you go through the OCD thing, and then the way to get through that moment is to distract yourself to do something else. And this is part of CBT as well, isn't it? That we have the thought, and it's a horrible thought, and it's making us very anxious. And so we pull our thinking away from that onto something else. So the high value parenting at that moment, I think, comes in saying, listen, I love you. We've done that bit. Let's make a cake. Let's watch a movie. Let's go take the dog for a walk. And it's up to you as the parent, I think, to make that suggestion, because she at that point is, still quite distressed. So if you just sort of say, well, what would you like to do? She says, I don't know what I want to do, and also don't say, now do your homework. That would be a mistake.
There's your reward.
Exactly. So at that point, you say, "Look, boom, let's do something else." And she said, "Oh, quality time." So I love the Gary Chapman stuff about 5 love languages. I'm sure you've come across that. Have you come across that? Yeah,
Yes,
cool.
yes.
Pretty much everyone has. And if the people listening to this haven't, I won't go through it now. Read. Well, you don't really need to read the book, do you? Just because it's just the 5. And look it up on Google, and then
Yeah.
just start thinking about the 5 ways in which he talks about. In particular, I think from a parent to a child, that parents often want to express their love for their child through acts of service. I do pick up your socks. I clean up after you. I cook for you. I'm your taxi. But the child is saying, yeah, I kind of take that for granted. I know I shouldn't, but I do. And I would love it if actually we had more quality time together. That would be the way.
100%.
Yeah.
100%. I think that's spot on.
With her, actually saying, let's look at those 5 languages. What would you like? And also, actually, then for the parent to say, well, this does go both ways, darling. You've said to me that you'd like more quality time. Definitely, we can work on that. But I'm your parent, and I would like it if you said, "Mummy, thank you. Mummy, Daddy, I really appreciate the stuff that you do for me," and affirm me as a parent occasionally.
And that's teaching them good skills for the life, really, isn't it?
Yeah.
I want to move on to working with boys because, gosh, what an interesting book.
Thank you.
I've had a few episodes where I've tried to kind of grasp this whole boy culture, masculinity. I hate the word toxic attached to masculinity. I think it's really damaging.
Yeah.
You talk about creating cultures of mutual respect in schools, and you go right in there, right at the start of the book, rape culture, and as a result of, now I think this happened over here in the West, and we've got lots of listeners who are not in the West, but the whole Me Too movement and I think even that was started by the girl who started writing about the rape culture in schools, which was a massive, all the schools went right. It was a really tough moment, I think. And actually, I think it was everyone's invited, wasn't it? Yes. And you say we have to start by acknowledging that the strategies school use to shape boys' relational cultures are not working. And I'm seeing this a lot in schools, and they're going, well, what are we supposed to do? So you talk about relational cultures and the way that boys relate to each other. And, what is underpinning why boys and men might behave badly towards women? And you say it's to do with their own relationships. Can you expand on that?
Yeah. And one person sort of heard me saying all this and kind of criticised me for saying that somehow I'm not blaming the individual boy. And I think that's a bit harsh. I think what we're trying to do is to find, as you say, the source of this. Where does it come from? And I think if we go back into pre-adolescence, if we go back into sort of 9, 10, 11-year-olds, they don't feel like that. They don't behave like that towards girls. And they kind of could if they chose to, in the playground, they could in primary school. It's not in their instincts to behave like that at all. When they become adolescent, the beginning of adolescence, that's when the value systems start to consolidate. So previous to year 7 and 11-year-olds, the value systems that they adopt are very largely the ones that they are given. As a parent, you will, we behave like this. And as a school, we behave like that. And if you don't, I'm going to massively disapprove of you, and I'm going to make you feel bad about breaking that value system. But when you're adolescent, of course, your biology is telling you to rebel. And so you are naturally going to reject those value systems, and you're going to replace them very by and large with a value system that works for you, but also for your mates. So you become a group at that point. And that group can be quite a small group, or it can be year group wide, which in a big school might be 250 boys. And that culture of the way that we relate to each other, what we say to each other, what we find funny, what we find acceptable and what we find unacceptable, forms in year 7. And it forms through key moments of somebody trying something out, trying to use a very strong, obscene word, and how do people react to that? The first time that somebody uses the C word, are we all going to laugh and think he's a real lad, or are we going to go, I don't know why you're using that word. I mean, I don't find that funny. So why? because being funny is incredibly important. And also, not just in language, but also in sport, because obviously sport's incredibly important. It is for girls too. Someone scores an own goal. What do we do about that? Are we going to get very angry with him? Are we going to actually amplify his incredible discomfort at that point? Or are we going to have a little bit of empathy and realize that it could just as easily have been you, that the ball bounced off your knee and into the goal, and it wasn't your fault, it wasn't his fault, and actually kind of go, never mind, Josh, it happens to all of us. Why don't you score the goal up the other end? Let's go. So these are critical moments. Also, of course, designed very much by the most influential boys in the year group. So there are all of these kind of factors that come together into a great melee. At the beginning of year 7, it's pretty much a blank piece of paper. These boys come to their new school. Many of them will know each other from primary school or whatever, but it is like a complete reset. And it coincides with their psychology also kind of doing pretty much a massive reset at the beginning of adolescence. By the end of year 7, all of these questions around how do we respond to girls and to football and all these things have been answered. And we are pretty much locked into a culture. So what I'm proposing is that is the moment, particularly in the autumn term of year 7, that we get stuck in there with the boys and the girls together, and we create, in the book, there's a series of lessons, all of which are using guided reflection to hold up a mirror to how the boys are and how they are quite likely to become, and get the girls involved in saying, yes, can you please not haroosh down the corridor in such a way that actually we get bumped all the time, because that's really upsetting for us. And the boys are going, I didn't realize you felt like that, what we do, So, and there's this big conversation that's going on throughout all the girls and all the boys in that year group about how the boys are going to be. And let's now use the word masculinity. What version of masculinity are they generally going to adopt? And what's the dominant version of that? So that by the time we get to year 8 and beyond, it becomes obviously unacceptable to abuse a girl. And somebody who did that, someone who by the time they get to year 10 has decided to send a nude picture of their genitals to a girl, all the other boys would kind of go, I have no idea why that's acceptable. And yes. It's not. And we are going to punish you by just not talking to you for really quite a long time.
Yes. Wow. Yeah. And you separate them into sour, so with the aggressive, overtly sexual side, and gentle, which is, treating each other with dignity and compassion. Yeah. And I think it's so important that we reflect on the fact that it is it is to do with being part of a group, but boys are different in the way that they try and be part of a group. And you say in the book that the friendship structures are much sort of broader. Yeah. And that the currency is different. And I think this comes back to, so for girls, it's fear of being in the shark-infested waters and not having a mate, like they need a friend. Isolation. For boys, you say it's shame. Can you talk a bit more about like how shame shapes boys and their feelings of friendship?
Absolutely. So what girls are frightened of isolation, boys are frightened of isolation too, but it's nothing like as painful. What boys are frightened of is humiliation and being shamed, which means the same thing. So much of girls' behavior comes from that fear of isolation, in the same way that so much of boys' behavior also comes from the absolute fear of being shamed and being humiliated. So once it doesn't take very long to say to the boys, you're all frightened of humiliation, aren't you? And they kind of harumph and a bit. But then one boy, and it's in the book, said he was only 9 years old when he said this to me. He said, but we don't want to talk about humiliation because it's humiliating to talk about. Humiliating. I went, gosh, yes, thank you. What an incredibly wise thing to say. So what we need to do in those lessons that I'm talking about in the autumn term of year 7 is to gradually desensitize those boys to that and make them aware that when they do humiliate somebody as a joke, as part of banter, that if they go too far, actually what they've created there is a genuinely horrible moment for that other boy. And he or may well want to come back at you with something equally really horrible. And then off we go, and it becomes a kind of an arms race. Now, the weird thing about that is that banter, which is a subsection of humour, and banter, I think it's really important just to be really clear what we mean by banter. Banter is the exchange of humorous remarks, okay? It's got to go both ways. And the remarks are are designed to have a very gentle form of humiliation. So you just kind of like, just calling the very tall boy shorty is a kind of, very, very mild version. So actually, the mechanism of banter is designed to desensitize boys to humiliation. That's what it's for.
Yes.
But the problem is how you regulate the banter so that it, A, doesn't go too far, and B, most importantly, and this is genuinely what is different about the male species of human beings, is that now that pornography is so prevalent, the banter, which has always had a sexual element to it, we've always sort of laughed about your mum's bum or something like that, but it's been relatively mild. The sort of dirty jokes thing has been relatively mild. Now, that sexual element of banter has become crazy, horrible, grim, ridiculous, inappropriate. And that's therefore leading the boys to become very desensitized to the idea of what's appropriate sexual talk and what isn't. And then that leads them, I think, to then abuse girls in a way that, doesn't even feel like they're doing it, because the pornography has kind of perverted their mind. It's not just the pornography, it's the talk about pornography. I think that's the point I make in the book. It's the talking about it, so that, within some small groups of boys, if you were to listen into what they talk about, I bet you'd find that sort of 80% of the time they're talking about pornography, as in they're sort of saying, oh, you see that girl in year 11, and then they say something massively inappropriate about that, or somebody else's mother, or a female member of staff. And you're going, you know what, you talk about girls in that way all the time. And they're going, we don't mean anything about it. It's just what we do. It's just how we talk. And you're going, yeah, but it's pretty grim, isn't it? Really, if your grandmother was listening, she wouldn't be happy, would you? And you'd feel ashamed of yourselves. And they kind of go, yeah, it's really difficult to pull back, though, from that, because that's how we do it. We make each other laugh by making these remarks. And so my feeling is that we need to prevent it from happening in the first place by getting the boys in year 7 to realize that kind of talk will get out of control. And when someone starts to use stronger language and stronger sort of anecdotes, imaginative anecdotes, that the other boys are going, no, don't do that. I'm sorry, I'm going to now, because I don't want to hear that stuff. It's horrible.
And what's interesting about that is it sounds to me like, because the whole thing about banter is, taking the piss out of each other. Yeah. And like you say, you can actually win hierarchical status by having good banter. It's a very powerful, empowering thing. And actually, I was talking to my husband about this last night, because he's in a group of men, and I look at some of the things they say to each other, and it just horrifies me sometimes. I say, really? You just said that? That's just, we would never talk like that to each other as women. And he says, no, but that's just, we've known each other for years, and we all know that it's kind of, and I think you were saying in the book that actually right at the top of the hierarchy, that kind of thin slice at the very top, they are able to give out and suffer really quite aggressive, painful banter. Yeah. But that's a show of pride. That's like, this doesn't touch the sides. Exactly. But woe betide someone who's lower down in the hierarchy who tries to say something like that to someone who's higher up. And, it's this moving around in the hierarchy. Yeah. But what interests me about what you've just been saying about pornography is, I suppose the one thing about that is it's kind of using that kind of language about banter, but you're not actually trying to attack the person. You're using something else that's outside of that friendship group, which is possibly a bit safer.
Yeah, sure.
I wonder whether that's part of what's behind it, because it's not, like you can gain power from it, but you're not actually endangering yourself by picking on something specific about that person.
Yeah, exactly. It becomes, objectified. Exactly.
Yes.
But when the hormones kick in and the libido kicks in, then we suddenly find ourselves in a very different place. And I think that's where, if we make that explicit in a guided reflection way, they can then self-regulate.
So let's go through that, because that's what really interests me. So we're saying we're now in this situation where you say actually it gets set around sort of year 7. Yeah. You get this culture embedded. So we need to get in quite early. We can't get in too early because some kids are still quite young.
And they haven't before they are sort of, as it were, entitled to sex education, because, part of this is going to need to be talking about the sexualized banter. You can't really do this without talking about that. So I kind of say you can prepare for it in years 5 and 6. But the very sad and almost tragic thing, I think, is that some boys will be accessing pornography in year 5 and 6. and they are, as it were, not entitled to have professional teachers supporting them through that experience and, making them understand what it is they are seeing, because the rest of the class are not seeing that stuff, and so you can't talk about it. But in
and I love that you say in the book, actually, if you're a parent and you're handing your child a device that can access the internet, you've got to have these conversations. And I say that time and again, that if you, when you think, oh, is my child ready to have a phone or have an internet connected device, you need to then say, are they ready to have conversations about pornography, sexting, all those things? If they're not, then it's not yet, they're not ready.
They're not ready.
It's as simple as that, really.
It is.
But so when you talk about guided reflection, I'm a parent. How would I do that with my son?
Around what? Around looking at pornography?
Pornography or masculinity? I mean, presumably it's a similar sort of process, or should we focus on pornography? Because that's one of the things you're saying is really problematic here.
Well, it is and it isn't. I mean, pornography is very problematic, and accessing it much too young is very problematic. But I suppose I'm looking at it more from an educator's point of view, and the effect that it has on the cultures of the boys. So my speech that I made to the boys and girls in year 7 was, look, there is adult material out there. Whether you access or not, that is kind of up to you, and it's up to your parents. It's not up to me, because I can't change whether you do that or not, because I don't have any controls over you. But what I am saying is that if you are in that bracket of people that choose to watch that, you can't bring it into school. It cannot become part of the conversation, which is then very, very shocking to the people who don't want to talk about it. So, a mother rang me up and said, my daughter's just come home from school. She was in year 7 and asked me what a blowjob is. And I've gone, that's wrong. It's just straightforward wrong for a girl of 11 years old to sort of suddenly be forced into understanding what that is. And so for me, it was much more about what you're talking about. So I think I'm going to sidestep that question. I think that each family is going to have to make its own mind up about access to the internet for boys, and when they finally do, what they're going to do about their exploration and discovery of pornography, and how it changes their thinking when they do. And I'm not sure that there is a hard and fast rule about what to do at that point. I think each family has to make its own mind.
And I like your point, because I think the guideline needs to be, actually, we need to have an opinion. Like the thing is, we stumble into this stuff without really having thought about it. And it's not fair. It's not fair that we're stuck in a situation where we're in a society where you have to consider these things, but we do. And actually, what I love is the phraseology there, because I use that with vaping. I use that with drugs, where I say, I know I can't stop you. I know that this is not in my control, but here's why I'd like you to really think about these things and what it would mean for you. And I always say to them, if you access this stuff, if you're getting engaged in this, it's going to infect you with a mindset that maybe you don't want. And maybe stay away from that. But with boys, like you say, being part of that group and social cachet is so important. And just before we finish, I just wanted to mention, because you did actually mention things like football, even in things like football, and the incredible role that our PE teachers can play with boys as girls as well. But and you saying, you see it out on the field all the time, where there's behaviour where someone will fake an injury, or and the way that we respond to this actually is teaching our kids what our ethics are. We're giving them guardrails, but perhaps not the ones we want, and without really thinking it through.
I think there is a massive message that I would want to give to parents around professional football, which is that the professional game has a terrible ethic, a terrible value system, where cheating is the name of the game, and you hear the commentators say it all the time. It's a professional foul. He took one for the team. You would expect him to pull that person down there. Well, he was pulling his shirt, but not so much. It's just about cheating, and that's the game, and we're not going to change that. But what I would want as a parent would be to sort of say, yes, but that's professional football. If you're going to play football, you're not going to behave like that. You're not going to feign an injury. You're not going to pull a shirt just because it's an event and try to do it so that the referee can't see it. That's just called cheating, and cheating is wrong. And cheating is, ultimately what, erodes everything in life, whether that's personal relationships or society itself. So let's not take on the value system of professional football. And if you're going to go and watch a game with your son or your daughter, don't pile in on the kind of the booing of the opposition because he fell over or whatever, because it has kind of even in more recent years. And I kind of tell an anecdote in the book, don't I? Going to see a game with my brother, and we're sitting with the home fans and we're away fans, and it was just really quite uncomfortable. Even just sitting in front of a man and a woman in their 40s with their two children, one age 10 and one age 6 or something like that. Even that was quite uncomfortable in terms of the language that the man was using, and then the boy age 6 was kind of mimicking. And I was just going, this is horrible. I don't understand why you need to kind of be so tribal about this in a way that's just really unhelpful, and it's just spoiling the enjoyment of everybody there. So yeah, I think professional football has got a lot to answer for, but you can just say to the boys, yeah, but that's that. We're going to ignore that. We're going to enjoy football for what it is, but we're not going to allow those values to infect us in any other way.
Yes. And the message being that we can't expect our boys to be better than we are. It's just not going to happen.
Yeah. Yeah.
Andrew, this is fascinating. I could talk to you all day. Such an interesting discussion. Thank you so much for joining us. If people want to get hold of you, how would they do that?
Yes, I've got a website. Girlsonboard.co.uk is probably the best one. I'm just developing my own website, andrewhampton.net, which is not really fully functional yet. But I'm more than happy, genuinely, to receive a message from a parent and then organise a Zoom call in so much as what I've got to say is of any value to them. Humbly, I'd be very happy to listen to a parent and sort of give them my perspective if that's what they want.
Amazing. What a great offer. Thank you so much, Andrew. Hopefully we'll see you again.
Indeed. Thank you very much, Rich. It's been a great pleasure talking to you.
My pleasure. That was Andrew Hampton, and his books and the links to his work are in the podcast notes. I read both of his books and I use his insights every day. If you found this helpful, go on, please like and share it with at least one other person right now. And it would just be amazing if you gave us a 5-star review. You can find all of the other episodes on www.teenagersuntangled.com, where there's a keyword search, and you can email me on teenagersuntangled@gmail.com and let me know what you think. Have a great week. Bye-bye for now.